All right. I'll get the live transcript. All right. Do you see the participants and the chat? Do I need to minimize those, or just someone come off mute or type in there if you don't mind? Yeah. What we'll do is I'll open up it's really a review session. So there is so much content. Okay, I'm gonna lower those. So if anybody needs, I will keep an eye on chat. It's not going to be open tonight. I'll see when something pops up in the window. So I apologize from time to time. It will come up, but I will keep it minimized until I see a comment or something, then call it open to look at it. So Wednesday night, my plan is to open up the room. We've got, it's a one-time review. And so what I thought the best use of that time would be, now here's the deal. Wednesday is not required. It does not count for attendance. It does not count against it. If you want to get together on Wednesday, then we certainly can do that. And then, we'll just basically use that time to answer questions, right, that you've got about any of the content. If I have to pull some of it up, I can go ahead and pull those decks up. But I've tried a structured approach before, and it's just, there's so much stuff to walk through in an hour that it just doesn't work. So Wednesday is optional, and we will certainly do what we can to to cover anything. All right, it is 8 o'clock. I am going to put the chat down. When something new comes up, I will see it. I will try to respond to it. If for some reason I'm not, please just come off mute tonight. I'm sitting in a hotel and I'm on my Mac. We've had some trouble with all of us getting logged into Zoom, so it's a little bit different than what I'm used to. So apologize for that. All right, so we're going to bring this home tonight, really looking at page 217 through 284. A pretty quick walk. Probably the most things we'll see is on security. So we'll dive in and we'll take a look there and see what we can get through. I'm going to try to make sure everyone, if you do ask a question, that's fine. Just please go back on mute when done. So health, and our learning objectives here tonight, really to explore the variety of best practices and programs to encourage healthy lifestyle choices. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because over the last 2 years, I've not seen but maybe one question on this. I'll try to guide you to where we are on that. Objective 2, we want to analyze while having healthy employees benefits the employers. All right. So, obviously that should be pretty much a no-brainer. And then focus on OSHA standards to maintain a healthy working environment. Probably something there that we do want to spend a little time and attention on. So under health on page 218, OSHA requires employees to provide a safe and healthy workplace free from recognized hazards, right? We went through that last time, that they are there to provide that guidance, right? That says, as an employer, you need to keep your environment, right, free from recognized hazards. So what often gets confused is people say, well, people will get confused and say, well, think about like manufacturing plants or chemicals, that's dangerous. That's correct. But what OSHA is saying is, in the confines of what you're doing, create that environment that is free from the hazards that would cause potential for serious bodily harm or for death, right? And so that's the extent. Now, really what OSHA also is saying is, if you think about health, right, where are some of the other things that you can do, right? Well, then that's where you get into more of the, fitness clubs on site, right? The different things that you can do to promote that healthy environment. But unfortunately, as I said last week, right, we've got to have OSHA regulations because some employers, and I've seen some, right, just frankly don't care. The bottom line wins, right? They have these really adverse working conditions. When I first started in the cable industry, right, that became kind of an OSHA concern because they kept the trucks of the technicians used well past their usefulness, and to the point that they were dangerous, right? Then and ladders were not getting replaced on time, and the poles that we were using for climbing, teaching techs to climb were barely like a toothpick, right? So much was taken off them. So that's the extent of why OSHA's passed that regulation. So then if you think about, okay, what is it from an HR perspective and a business perspective that we can do to really drive home healthy employees, right? Because at the end of the day, if you've got healthy employees, you probably have happier employees. They're probably going to have less absences, right? You're probably, in all honesty, going to have less costs on insurance that would drive up premiums. And you end up missing, you end up without missing out on productivity. You probably have lower turnover as well. And so one of the things that I think is a huge, huge benefit that really has, I still think, a lot of room to become a mainstream benefit, and that's the employee assistance programs. And, EPAs provide direction and that confidential assistance to employees struggling with things like alcoholism, right? Drug abuse. Maybe there's conflicts in the family. Maybe there's financial pressures. It might be stress related at work. I remember talking, you talk about EAP and the benefit of it, that a friend of mine at work, when we were going through the merger of Time Warner and Charter, was going to see a psychologist, right? Just said, look, a counselor. And he said the first thing counselor said was, we're on the company's EAP. I don't know what you're doing to people over there, but we're lambasted, right? We're busy. So EAPs, I think there's a lot that still needs to be done in most organizations to really educate employees on the value of that program, what it does, that it's okay to use it, that it's free to employees. It's a huge benefit. I had one of my former students last summer about this time. We were talking about this part and said that the EAP, and it was a national brand, I can't remember which one, said that our organization is one of the top 5 companies that utilize the EAP, right? And they're not free, right? They cost a lot. And yet that utilization rate was only 17%. Right. It was a microcosm against the employee base. So, anything from a perspective of trying to market and promote and drive that, I think makes sense. I unfortunately, right, they're good tools. It just never really ever gained a lot of traction. And I think there was some taboo around it as well. People thought, well, I can't use that. Right. And they're really great tools. So incredible new resource that really does help drive really that mental health of employees. And in some cases too, with drug abuse, alcoholism, it's the first step to getting the employees help to, where they need to go to continue to get help and treatment. And so that really dovetails nicely then into employee wellness programs. And you can follow along here on page 221 through 226. And, at the end of the day, the wellness programs are designed to offer preventative care services and really encourage employees to adopt healthy lifestyles and proactively manage chronic diseases. So I think this is becoming more and more mainstream in organizations, right? You think about things like maybe weight loss clinics. There are things where there have been, after work yoga or walking clubs. Healthy dietary, teaching people what to eat, how to cook, how to prepare it right. I know the cafeteria that we had at Time Warner was always had a salad bar and a healthy selection choices, right? So instead of burger and fries, you could get a nice veggie wrap or something of that nature. So, you think about wellness programs, they come in all shapes and sizes. And I think this is one of those benefits that I've seen that you can be real creative with, that might be a differentiator when people are considering, where do I go work? All things being equal, right? Is this one of the things that moves the needle on that? So employee wellness programs. Now I'll share kind of a funny downside of this, right? And something to be cautious of. You won't see this on the exam, but I wanted you to just know this, right? When I was still with Time Warner, a couple of years before the charter merger, they had really gone, pretty health conscious, right? A lot of different programs, and they wanted to start a competition internally. And what they were trying to do is get people active, right? To get people moving into health. And so they set up this competition that you could do it as an individual or you could do it as teams, right? And then they were going to give away iPads, which were a big thing at the time, for the groups that had the most hours of exercise and so, but they were going to go on the honor system. And so right out of the gate, right, somebody came to me and said, hey, would you partner? I said, oh, Mark and I have already teamed up. Well, Mark and I were both training for Ironman. So we were putting in 30 hours a week. And she looked at me and she said, well, I'm not even going to participate in this because I have no chance of winning. And I'm like, all right, that becomes kind of a problem, right? When you got that. Then the other thing was there were a group like in San Antonio, right, that ended up having an average of 28 hours per person of exercise a day. And so I knew the director that was over the program. I said, look, I'm not a math genius, and probably why I went into the marketing HR in the first place. But there are only 24 hours in a day. I'm not really sure how you're going to average 28. And so what happened was it just became a competition amongst people that were already doing what they're driving people to. And the ones they were trying to reach just gave up and quit. And then you got a bunch of people mad at each other, right? Like we were literally doing, 30 hours a week, 7 days, what was that? 4 hours a day, right? Working out. That's a lot. And you got people coming back with 28. So when doing wellness programs, the moral of that story is really think through, right? If you're going to have competitions, right? Maybe different levels, different weightings, right? Because that ended up becoming a big detractor. They just killed the whole thing. They didn't award anything. They just shut it down and said, we're, having, some dishonesty here. And it was a big black mark. It really ended up, could have been something very special and could have been a driver engagement. It ended up, doing just the exact opposite. So sometimes the best intentions really end up not necessarily right with the best outcomes. So just keep that in mind as you're looking at the different types of wellness programs. So there might be blood pressure checks, cholesterol screenings, right? There might be blood drives, right, where you can get all that screened. Might be from strength training, what have you, healthy eating, healthy diets. And again, I think it really depends on what you're trying to do and what the needs are for the employee base. All right, knowledge check time. Which of the following is true? One of these is true. 3 aren't about employee and systems programs. The program should be accessible from 9 to 5 or during all regular business hours. All programs and conditions reported by the EAP should be reported to management and to the employee supervisor. Plan participants should be required to meet with EAP staff at the EAP office. Program should be open to all employees and family members. So I'm relying on you because I don't even have the answers to all these tonight. Yeah, it's D, right? The program should be open to all employees and family members, right? There should never be problems and conditions reported by the EAP to management and to the employee's supervisor. You might be surprised sometimes. Like I shared with you the story in the health insurance of the insurance company that gave the CFO of the company the names of the 4 people that really used insurance and drove up the premiums. Can't do that, right? There's some pretty substantial federal HIPAA laws around that. Okay, so now we've got the PPACA and wellness programs, and the PPACA allows employers to financially reward workers who adopt healthy behaviors. This was part of the legislation that then President Obama passed, better known as Obamacare. And the 5 requirements of the wellness program must satisfy, right? So they can come in, right? What you need to know for the exam is, can wellness programs be a part of the PPACA? The answer to that is yes. But the 5 requirements are: the wellness rewards in total cannot exceed 30% of the cost of coverage, where the cost of coverage is the total amount of employer and employee contributions for the employee's benefit package. The program must be reasonably designed to promote health and prevent disease. The program must give individuals eligible to participate the opportunity to qualify for the reward at least once per year. The reward must be available to all similarly situated individuals, and the plan must disclose in all materials describing the terms of the program the availability of a reasonable alternative standard. So that was actually, I think, one of the better pieces of that legislation, that you can have wellness programs and they are able to financially reward employees under the PPACA. The bloodborne pathogen standard, okay, this is page 233 and 234, right? It's saying that if there are bloodborne pathogens, that you have to have special care, special processes around that. So what is a bloodborne pathogen standard? Here it says reasonably anticipated skin, eye, mucous membrane, or peritoneal contact with blood, which is basically internal, or other potentially infectious materials resulting from the performance of the employee's duties. So where this becomes really applicable would be dentist's offices, doctor's offices, like LabCorp, hospitals, right, where they're drawing blood. However, it is very applicable if you think about places where there might be a lot of saws, knives, right, manufacturing plants, meatpacking plants, right, that would have a standard there as well. So government basically says, if you're going to have this opportunity, right, to have this, you got to have a plan. So A, write the plan. B, 2, you want to minimize exposure risk by using engineering controls. Okay, work practices and personal protective equipment, commonly referred to as PPE, which really wasn't a mainstream term until COVID. Okay, assure vaccination of affected employees against hepatitis B, very contagious. 4, inform employees of the hazards posed by bloodborne pathogens by posting signs and by conducting employee training. And 5, maintain medical records for employees who have been exposed for a duration of employment plus 30 years. And there can be some substantial fines if someone comes into audit, probably OSHA, and there is not 30 years worth of records. Now, you got to make sure if you're in a merger and acquisition, you're bought out, that stuff carries forward as well. So if you don't, again, you might have an office where that's not the case, someone gets cut, right? This doesn't apply. It's those areas where you are very likely to come in contact with blood and to have some challenges with that. So have a really good standard put together there as well. And again, think about things like, right, when they were doing initial research on AIDS and HIV, right, really making sure smallpox, measles, mumps, right, even COVID, that those could be really dangerous situations that you need to prevent. Do we really need to spend any time on this slide, right? have to laugh, right? Likely might see a question on it. One of the things, tell you, how much this caught people off guard was part of the risk management section. And we didn't really talk much about this, but I'll just give it to you here because it's kind of a funny story. Is a business continuity manual. And when I was in the cable industry, we did those. So basically, business continuity is if you have a big interruption due to X, this is how you're going to continue business. If you have, like, for example, when I worked in Memphis, we had a storm come in, right? And it took power out to the call center. We had a business continuity. What do you do in case of a storm? Well, you put the head end and everything on generator. You get the computers up on generator. What we missed was we didn't have the air conditioner on generator. So it's July in Memphis in a brick building with windows that don't open. And so, but that gives you some ideas. So my wife was running a mall at the time, mall manager, and she said, Chris, and then she left. And the pandemic came out, and the person who took over for her called and she said, I know what you're going to say. She said, we had a business continuity model for everything. If an airplane crashed in the mall, terrorist attack, active shooter, right, flood, fire, car drives through the mall, right, you name it. She said that book was probably as thick as all of our class manuals put together. She goes, the one thing we did not have in that book was, what do you do if a pandemic hits? And of course, when businesses shut down, that just was going to kill them all. So kind of interesting, right? So pandemic, right? And, at the end of the day, we're really not out of that yet. We're actually very, very close. But again, what we look at here is at the end of the day, right? What I want you to take away is this isn't probably the last time this is going to happen. Okay. In fact, I read something the other day that I'm working with the group APHIS. They're the veterinary arm of the government's APHIS division. And we actually had to stop a project because they're overwhelmed with avian flu. And the avian flu is a flu that's killing birds. It's very similar to COVID, completely different, but it's kind of happening at the same time. And they're trying to figure it out. Well, unfortunately, it was China, right? The first case of avian bird flu now has been seen in humans. It's jumped, and that's exactly, COVID was more of a animal strain. So all that to be said, right? Don't say that to scare you. It's like, okay, right? What did we learn from this? If this happens again, how do we deal with it, right? What do we do from an emotional standpoint, a mental standpoint? Physicality, right? Remote working, everything, so we don't get caught, kind of left behind like some did before. All right. So toxic substances on page 236 through 238, right? At the end of the day, right, a toxic substance, it's it's chemicals, right? It might be some of the sheathing around wiring, what have you. And so you have to go back to those material safety and data sheets like we talked about last week and really understand what is it that we have in our environment. How do you deal with it safely? And part of that then is understanding toxic substances. And so it's thinking out oh, sorry, we're all having issues on the facilitator here. So a couple of things you look at then for toxic substances. One, we want to kind of figure out like the bottom level and the top level of what's acceptable. So no adverse effect, right, level. That's the highest dose or exposure amount that would cause no ill effects, right? Think about radiation, same thing, right? What's the highest amount that you can get, right? That's not going to cause ill effects like being out in the sun. That's radiation, now, other than getting a sunburn and over time. But you're not going to walk out of there glowing or sick. And then you got that toxicity threshold, which is really the lowest dose or exposure amount for which toxic effects can be observed. So the highest level you can get without being toxic, and then it's the lowest dose that will provide from toxicity, right? So then you got to figure out, okay, now that we know these things, what's the plan we put in place to deal with it? I know a friend of mine was an x-ray tech, and they always would wear these little badges, and they were copper. If they started to turn green, then you knew you were getting too much exposure to radiation, right? And then there was a problem. You had to fix that, right? So that's how you deal with toxic substances. And then on 239 and 240, right, one of the big things is, it's funny, I coming in LA, right? I was driving out LAX, which was just harrowing in and of itself, trying to take like 18 different roads to get to where I'm going. And there was a sign, right? And it was by an attorney of all things about workplace stress. And if I think what the gist of the billboard was, right, if your employer's not taking good care of you, let's sue them. But it made me think, right? I was looking at this on the airplane today that mental health is tough, and you think about different things like boredom could be some cases, right? Others it might be burnout. Right. I like to say I'm a 3-ball juggler and I got 10 in the air, and if I drop one, they're all going, right? That pace sometimes that you just can't deal with anymore, being cognizant of that. For some, it's anxiety, right? Others maybe depression, right? Couple stories to share. I think I shared this one that, we talk about, one of the things to look for is that change in behavior, right? If an employee is all of a sudden like withdrawn or making errors, or their behavior changes, right, something's going on. And that was the case for one of my former students with a really good employee. And one of the people said, well, we need to write him up. So let's figure out what's going on. This is abnormal. And at the end of the day, right, what happened was he's like, oh, you know what? I've had 4 family members, 3 or 4 die of COVID. My kids have it. My wife has it. I don't know what to do. Right. That is it. We had what I heard, there were a lot of, people loved working at home. I love it. But, I thought about it. I'm like, well, I'm just here. Right. Why would no one like this? And, what we found there were a lot of single employees that were high I's on the DISC scale. They were high expresses or amiables on the social style scale. And that their socialization came from in-person meetings in the office. And you know what? When COVID got shut down, that went away, right? You weren't going to the office, but you also weren't going to the gym. You weren't going out to restaurants. And so that became a point of where, their research shows there's been some increases in depression, right? I actually even heard a radio ad out here in LA today about the effect, the effects of COVID, right? If you're struggling with that. And so a lot of employees, maybe it's a drinking problem, right? Maybe the work just started to not get done. Maybe it's burnout because they were working 15 hours a day because they had nothing else to do. And so, I'm sitting here going, all right, I get it. But, during that time, my daughter's at home going to school remotely. My wife has always worked remotely. I got my whole family unit there. Well, then here's the deal. Stacy's dad needed help, so she had to go spend a week with him. And then, she'd alternate with her sister. And when she was gone, Ellie went to be with her mother. And all of a sudden, I'm in that home by myself. I'm like, I get it. I get how this can be a challenge. So I think it's everything from the work pressures to life pressures, right? To, right now, a lot of people are watching their 401ks like the market just took a free for all again today. Inflation is way out of control, right? So 401ks are dwindling. Cost of everything's going up. right? It's being mindful of those types of, yeah, it's horrible, Marilyn, you're right. I mean, this inflation, and it's, it's not going to get any better anytime soon, right? A couple more rate hikes. I hate to tell you, ain't going to do it, because you've got the stuff going on in Ukraine, the threat of nukes, right? You've got earnings that are in the toilet because a lot of organizations are still having supply chain issues. Oh yeah, I think this is far worse, and I think it's going to go way, way worse than 2000. We're just scratching the surface, I think, of where this is going to end up, because you're still coming off the pandemic, and you've got China really in a big lockdown, and unfortunately, we put a lot of eggs in that basket, right? I was driving by all sorts of car dealerships on the way up here from LA today. There's like nothing on the lot, right? Because all those computer chips come from China, right? A lot of our medicines come. So that said, a lot of people are facing, it costs twice as much to eat, get groceries, right, to drive somewhere. So, be mindful of the added pressure at work that we're putting on people to perform. And, at the end of the day, I'd kind of go off script on this one and just say, what I would also say is, be careful of being in that caregiver role, because that's what we do as HR, right? We're in this because we love people, but don't forget yourselves, right? Because who's going to take care of us? We are always the ones that listen, that give, that help. And at some point, that just becomes really stressful in and of itself. So, be mindful. Things like EAP that we just talked about are really good resources, to help make sure you're taken care of. You can't just, it's like, who pastors the pastor, right? Who takes care of the clergy, who doctors the doctors, right? That type of thing. So mental health, big consideration. And so kind of going down that same line on page 240 and 242, we have the stress and the alarm reaction, and it's called the general adaptation syndrome. And it's really kind of the fight or flight syndrome, right? So think about people that are under a lot of constant stress, experience negative impacts to their health, right, as a result of the physiological responses. The research shows that when under a lot of stress, the body can't tell a difference between the mental stress and the physical stress. It was fascinating. When I was doing Ironman, right, I was training, we were really mindful of my cortisol levels. And so cortisol is kind of when stressed out, the adrenal glands will, when you're producing adrenaline, cortisol will really have debilitating effects on your health, your sleep. It's basically called adrenal burnout. And so I remember talking to my Ironman coach. I said, I got a really, really stressful week at work, and didn't like my boss and a bunch of other things. He said, then we're going to cut your mileage way back. Because he said your body cannot tell the difference between the stress induced by the physical activity on the adrenal glands and the stress. And he said, I don't need to be adding to it. He said, now we're going to do some, because it will help counteract that. But if I put you out there in full 30-hour-a-week mode and you've got this, that's not going to end well, right? And so it's that continual stress of just going on and on and on that really can end up providing or causing some pretty serious health issues in employees. All right, another big benefit that you'll start to see in many places. Somebody, can't remember if this group or the last group, had this, their spouse worked at Apple and had medical facilities, but it's really on-site medical care. And when I was interviewing at Abbott Exchange in Charlotte a few years ago, right, that they had a clinic, right? They had a doctor and a nurse on site, and that the family members and the employee could get their vaccinations. Now, it was kind of like a doctor's care, right? Or an urgent care. It wasn't for, ongoing serious issues, but they could get in and they could get seen, and they contracted that out. Now, there wasn't a pharmacy on site, but they had a workout facility. They had like like some saunas and things in the shower, and then they had on-site medical employees, right? So that became a much less expensive way to do it, right? And what it did was it kept people from having to take a full day off work or a half day to go to the doctor. They could make an appointment, right? Take the 30 minutes, go do that, or have their family come up and do it, and then still be able to work for the day. All right. Knowledge check. The fight or flight response refers to, is it the ambivalence people feel when they experience stress? Well, we know that's not the answer. B, the difficulty people experience in making decisions under stress. C, the physiological changes that occur under stress to prepare the body for action, i.e. fight or flight, or the irrational way people tend to respond under stress. What do you think? Yeah, it's C, right? It's that physiological changes that occur under stress to prepare the body for action. So, kind of an interesting side note here that there has been a lot of research done, and that there are, and this was in the social style model. This poor student had to actually cancel class tonight. So the social style model, you got 4 behavioral styles. You've got a driving style and an expressive style, and they are more tail-oriented styles. Fast-paced, don't ask questions, basically tell people what to do. And then you've got the analytical style and you've got the amiable style, and they are more of what we call an ask orientation. They will slow down their speech. They will ask a lot of questions. They'll take time to make decisions. And when looking at, so the world population, the research shows about 25%, each style represents about 25% of the world's population. So it's pretty even. That the driving style and the expressive styles are when under stress, they will go into fight mode, right? Their physiological response is, like for me as an expressive, if you tell me, well, I worked really hard on this idea to bring in revenue, and the boss goes, that's not going to work, my response is probably going to be fight. And in the manner of, what do you mean that's not going to work? You didn't even look at it. I put a lot of time into this. I need you to validate for me why, right? Where an analytic style and an amiable style, their fight or flight responses to move, to go away, right? To flee. There was a driving style leader in a meeting with an analytic person. He's like, I need you to do this, this, and this by today. And the person just got up and left the meeting. And I saw her grab a coat and left. And the boss says, well, where'd Diana go? I said, I think she went home for the day. Why? I said, you were telling her what you need. No, we were just having a conversation about what needed to happen. I said, no. You told her you needed this, this, and this by today. You were getting frustrated that it wasn't done. So that's your fight mode, right? These are the type of things to look at work. Her response under pressure is flight. And she's like, you know what? I'm just out. I can't deal with it. I need time. I need to ask questions. Not giving me. I'm leaving. So that's what it's looking at, that physiology. The feeling's the same. How you deal with it and cope with it is very different. And it's important to know that you got half the employee population is going to come out swinging, not physically, but metaphorically, and the other half are just going to withdraw, shut up, go away. And so figuring out what the response is critical. All right, so we're done with that section. And let's bring it home with security in the few minutes that we got left tonight. And this is a group that you might end up seeing, some things possibly on the exam. So our learning objectives here, we've learned how to conduct a vulnerability analysis and analyze security measures to ensure workers and customers are safe. Right, really, it's kind of a risk mitigation strategy. In essence, it is in its core right? You're trying to mitigate that, but you're doing it from a security measure. We want to review legislative protections for people and property and dissect OSHA standards and what to do in the event of an emergency. So organizational security, right? This has become more and more prevalent, unfortunately, in the world that we live in. And really, what is it, right? Well, it's the protection of a company's assets, and that's everything from physical buildings, right? It's employees, it's customer data, right? It might be warehouses, it might be products, right? Raw materials, finished products, and it might be intellectual property, right? You think about Coca-Cola. There is a vault that would rival any vaults in the United States sitting in the basement of Coke in Atlanta with the original formula in it, right? It's that important. If that gets out, because no one's really been able to duplicate that. You got off-brand sodas, they don't taste like Coke, right? Nothing does. And why they thought they needed to change that back in the 90s is beyond me. But yeah, organizational security. And, the big element today with organizational security, right? It was always physical security first, even to the point a lot of CEOs have bodyguards that travel with them. But based on everything that's happened really in the last 5 years and last year and the year before, it's that cybersecurity, right? People are scrambling now, right? We got that gas pipeline shut off, just skyrocketed gas prices in the matter of days in the East Coast, right? We've had hospitals shut down. We've had meatpacking plants shut down. So really thinking about how do we protect, right, that cyber element, i.e. customer data, and just business continuity, right? At the end of the day, that was the, big thing, right? If I am now running an electrical company or a water company or a dam, I am putting everything I've got into cybersecurity. Because we learned when they shut off gas to the East Coast, it literally crippled us within a week. Think of what happens if they get hold of the electrical grid or the water grid, right? That becomes, that becomes life or death matters. And then you shut the gas off. We're back in the anarchy of Walking Dead, within a couple of weeks. It's that serious in organizational security. Teresa, my dad's office, primary care doctor, was hacked earlier this year, threatened to wipe out all pay. Yeah, right. That's it's incredible, right? Scary, right? Never thought at the end of the day, right? And I don't mean, please don't take this as political, just my wife and I were talking about it. But for years and years and years, we thought, and it might still be, that we were going to arm and nukes. And right now it's bacterial, viral, and hackers that really could have an impact, right? That I think is where organizations are going, right? The next level of terrorism isn't going to come from what we probably saw at 9/11. Is going to come from this, right? It's going to come from that cybersecurity and doing that, or from the biological. And again, how do you do it? Well, you protect your physical assets, you protect your people there as well. Scary stuff. Big business. So how do you know if you're vulnerable, right? Well, it's kind of like a risk mitigation strategy. You do a vulnerability analysis. And what a vulnerability analysis involves is identifying the company's assets and then analyzing potential threats to these assets, right? You got to figure out, is it our formula for Coke, right? Is it our raw materials? Is it our vehicles? Is it our executives? Is it our buildings? Are we vulnerable some way? Is it employees? Is employees traveling abroad, right? We did a bit of a vulnerability analysis, and we sent one of my peers over to Brussels to work with NATO on something, right? Based on everything that's going on in Ukraine, we did a quick, all right, what do we need to do? And at the end of the day, it proved safe and it was the right thing, but we had to think through that, right? As well. So tangible assets, equipment, inventories, buildings, right? Tangible assets, right? Intellectual property, information, data, customer information, right? Things that could get leaked out or get in the wrong hands could be a real detriment to an organization. And, at the end of the day, if you're not doing a vulnerability analysis, I can guarantee you the bad people are, right? That's exactly what they're doing. Where are people weak? How can we exploit that? So trying to figure that out really is the core of what you're trying to do. Then you got liability limits, right? And these are probably more for retail associates. Right? So you've got the liability of, hey, if we arrested somebody for doing something and it was not correct, right? Then we've got some liability there. There could be assault, there could be invasion of privacy, defamation, unlawful detention, right? It might be even accusing someone of drinking on the job and you send them to get a drug test and they weren't. Right. I actually had that happen early on as a GM when my office manager said, I could smell alcohol on such and such employee, and I sent them for a drug test and they were stone cold sober. It was their cologne. It was old and it was cheap. It smelled like alcohol. Well, you know what? Thank God the person was, we apologized profusely and was decent about it, but that could have been, liability, could have been sued for that. So really figuring out where are the liability limits in an organization. Sorry, let me help this facilitator. Hard to try to teach and help a peer. I'm so sorry. All right. And then signal detection theory. Okay. So really what you're trying to look at with signal detection theory is figure out where do we have challenges, right? It really is a systematic approach for studying human vigilance and categorizing the kind of mistakes human monitors are likely to make. So think about like a security officer. You got the vertical axis on the left and a horizontal axis across the top, environmental situation. So you've got a security officer that, let's start at the bottom, that far bottom right corner, there was no threats and there was no action taken, then it's a true miss, right? There was nothing going on. You might have an actual threat and no action taken, right? Someone's walking in, you got 3 people walking in the store, 2 of them are tying up clerks, someone else is walking around, you might have an actual threat and you didn't take an action, then there's a security breach, right? They shoplifted. You might have a detected threat, right? I detect one, my radar went up, but it was false. There was nothing there. There was no threat. Okay, better cautious than not. That's a false alarm. And if you detect a threat and there actually was one, and that's where you have a hit. So it's really looking at how you go through, I think where your dangers are, right, that bottom left-hand quadrant where there might be a threat, you might not have detected it, and it was something that happened, there becomes a security breach, right? So, a camera, you always see it in the movies, right? You got the security guard sitting there and someone's outside doing something, a camera flickers off for a minute, comes back on. You need to check that out, right? Could it be wiring or electrical? Yeah, sure, right? Could that be something that is more of a deal? Absolutely. Oh, wow, Teresa, 2 weeks they were down. That's a long time, right? And then so now you got to figure out, if I'm a patient, that can't be good for business. You don't know what happened to my records. You don't know who has them. You don't know what you treated me for. I might not want to come here anymore. That's scary, right? And no fault of their own. I mean, that stuff happens. That's why we're going through this. All right, signal detection theory. Knowledge check. According to signal detection theory, what happens when there is an actual threat, right, and no action taken? Is it a false alarm, a security breach, a true miss, or a detection violation? That should probably be pretty easy. Yeah, it's a security breach, right? When there was a threat detected and no action was taken, then you have yourself a security breach. Okay, privacy protection laws 259 through 260. All right, we're going to cover these quickly. Probably good to know them for the exam. The Federal Wiretapping Act, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the Privacy Protection Act, Polygraph Protection Act, and the U.S. Patriot Act. So the Federal Wiretapping Act on page 260 through 262, this prohibits the deliberate interception of private telephone and oral communications, right? What it basically says is if you are going to wiretap something, you need to have a warrant. Now, there are some limitations, there are some exceptions to it, right? Where you are recording telephone calls, right, in a call center for playback purposes, right, to train employees, or where you're monitoring if you're a communications provider and you're monitoring your system, right, for issues, right? You want to make sure maintaining. What they're trying to stop people from doing is the old, Watergate, right, where you're listening in to everyone's conversations, right? So that's the Federal Wiretap Act. Do I believe that's probably being held to as often as it should be? Probably not. But the problem is, if you do tap something and you get evidence, it's not admissible in court due to this law. So yes, if you're recording phone calls, right, for playback purposes, for training and education to monitor your system, that's fine. Fair Credit Reporting Act in 262 through 264. Basically, this offers protection to individuals against negative credit reports containing false or misleading information. So basically, if you're going to fire somebody or not hire somebody based on their credit report, then you have to go ahead and give them the report and the reason why, and give them a chance, right, to have a rebuttal to it. We were getting ready to hire somebody once. And, at the end of the day, everything was good. And the credit report came back just trashed. And we're like, well, we can't hire us. Well, let's give the person the benefit of, let's figure out what's going on. And he wasn't going to be dealing with any money, right? And he's like, look, I've recently gone through a divorce. And he said, my ex-wife had taken out a bunch of credit cards in my name, didn't know it, ran them up, had no idea. And I'm working on, I'm fixing it, I'm paying it off. And so we went back and looked. Prior to that, nothing. And so, we hired him, right? It's like, you can't control that, right? And now, if he was going to be, front, the teller at a bank or, in finance, then that probably would have had to pass some more scrutiny. But if you're going to make that negative decision based on a credit report, you have to provide them, tell them why, and give them a chance for rebuttal. The Privacy Protection Act is to protect privacy of individuals employed in government agencies or government contractors. So in essence, there's notice employees should be informed of the information kept about them by the employer. What are we keeping, right? Authorization employees should authorize the collection of the third-party information. Access employees should have accessibility to the information. Correction, the employee can challenge the accuracy of the information. Confidentiality, disclosure of information requires employee authorization. Again, that is for individuals employed in government agencies and government contractors, right? My company, we do a lot of work with government. We're a government contractor. This is part of that as well. Call me on that, Leafler. We'll have that conversation later, right? It was at a direct. The question basically is, why was a credit report pulled if you're not going to have access to finance it? It was part of our hiring process for directors and above, because we thought that showed in essence, right, how you handle your money is probably how you're going to do things at work, right? Are you going to be responsible with it? So it was being looked at in terms of a bigger piece of the pie, in terms of background checks, references, right? Because we had a lot of people that we had found had stellar references, and right, they got in and they were just train wrecks, right? And part of it was, right, we thought if you don't handle your own finances very well, that probably, Tony Robbins always says, my wife uses, how you do one thing is how you do everything. That's part of what we look at that for. In that case, right, it wasn't a, nothing of his, and that story checked out. We looked at it and decided to go through with that. Employee Polygraph Protection Act. This provides privacy protection for employees, right? So in essence, the test is part of an ongoing investigation of losses suffered by the employer. The tested employee had access to the property in question, right? The employer had reasonable suspicion of the employee's involvement, and the employer provided a statement explaining the basis for suspecting the above conditions. Now, you cannot make anybody take a polygraph test, right? You just can't do it, right? But there are situations, I think, pharmacists, right, armored car drivers, some areas that you can do those for pre-employment reasonings, but you do not have to submit to a polygraph. That is one that I would say you need to look at as well in terms of what is the state law, right? Because there are a lot of very nuanced things around the state law there as well. Yeah, law office candidates, another one I believe that you would look at in terms of polygraph protection. Patriot Act, this expanded the authority of the U.S. law enforcement agencies. It was formerly the Freedom Act. Basically, when the Freedom Act, it came about because of 9/11, that they could be more aggressive, the government, in trying to look into people's backgrounds to snuff out terrorism before it started. And so when the Freedom Act ended, the Patriot Act basically took place the next day with many of the same nuances that expanded the authority of U.S. law enforcement agencies to really dig deeper and figure out, and that's, I think, at one of the levels, if you look at like the Patriot Act, right, one of the levels of having, control over our borders. And that's a big thing. I read an article the other day. They said that there were 26 of the top, 50 or 100 known terrorists that they apprehended at the southern border, and wonder how many got through. So it's not that we don't want you here, right? But we want to know who's here. Like when I went through security in Germany, right, you get into Italy. I mean, it's like, where are your train tickets? Where are you going? How long? Well, I mean, we want you here. And that was part of what I think is rubbing up against the Patriot Act is, we're trying to do things that stops bioterrorism and cybersecurity and nuclear and planes flying into buildings. Got to figure out who's here. And right. So that was part of what was passed on. I think that's some of the angst around, the ongoing debate about border security. Excuse me. Knowledge check time. Polygraph testing is legal when the test is part of an ongoing investigation of losses. New employees are being hired. All employees are tested equally, or the employee is informed of the results. Yeah, it's the test is part of an ongoing investigation of losses. So there you go. Matt, I'll do it. If you don't hear from me tonight, just send me another note tomorrow. But I gotta run out as soon as I'm done here and get something to eat. But I'll try to take a look at it. I'm actually, it's like 9 o'clock East Coast time, and it's like 7 here. Or like 6 o'clock here. So I gotta get something to eat and go to bed. But I'll be glad to look at it. You're more than welcome. And again, if I haven't responded, email me again. You're not bothering me. Might be a little bit dicey tomorrow. I'm shooting videos all day. I'm out here doing some production for our company. So, but in between, I'll do it. And worst case, we can just jump on a quick call and I'll help you with that. Protection of proprietary information, right? Companies try to ensure at the end of the day, this is cybersecurity, right? That firewalls, viruses, prevent those spyware, malicious attacks from encroaching on their system. I'm not going to go through that in too much detail. Crisis management, contingency planning, much like I told you that business continuity plan that my wife did at the mall, right? Ensuring the company has a plan for handling emergencies, right? So things you want to consider, right? Who's going to be the chain of command, right? Employees accounting protocol to ensure all employees are safe. And that's a big one, right? You know who's at work today, right? You know where they were, right? That was one of the big problems with 9/11. And at the end of the day, right, you'd really, who's scheduled to work but stopped to get coffee, who called in sick, right? You gotta, these things matter. They don't until they do, right? So trying to figure out a way to have that accounting for all employees. Establishment of a communications center, right? Think about that picture we saw last week, right? Where the train or whatever it was went through the buildings. Like, okay, how are we going to get communications back up? Where do we need to figure out the place? That building, I gave you the example that blew up, right? Same thing. It's like, okay, where is everyone? They were able to account for everyone basically right away and knew that no one was killed. Only 3 people were hurt. Third bullet point, or fourth, employee training to ensure preparedness, education for employees on where and how to provide or receive medical assistance, and who is part of the company's emergency team. Having that in place. But at the end of the day, you can't just write it. You got to write it, put it in place, and practice it. People need to understand how to use it. And then emergency preparedness, right? Being able to provide for well-beings of employees during a crisis, right? So what's the executive policy regarding emergency responses? Okay, right? Fire, tornado, right? Like my wife just texted me a few minutes ago. She goes, "Do you realize we had an earthquake in South Carolina last night?" I'm like, "No, I didn't." Right? Well, what if that was a really bad one? What's the response, right? The emergency response. Who's the program coordinator to oversee the development, implementation of a plan? It should create an advisory committee, right? You want to conduct that risk assessment. We talked about that. What's acceptable? What do you offload to others? What are things you can do to mitigate that risk? Continue, evaluate, modify the plan in response to emerging risk factors, and communicate the plan to employees and train them how to respond. And then another one is, and this is, I gave you the example, right? When my peer went over to Brussels, Belgium, right, to talk to NATO, it's like, all right, we got to consider, right? What do we need to do, right? Is that a risk? And at the end of the day, it wasn't a risk, and we were surrounded by more intel people than in military. It wasn't an issue, but how do you then protect employees abroad, right? And it might be oil companies working in harsh desert conditions or in the Middle East, right? It was a friend of mine grew up, his dad worked in Saudi Arabia and in an oil company, and they had a base that basically like a military base where it was, women didn't have to wear head coverings, alcohol was served. But he said the minute we stepped off that base, that we always had bodyguard protection, even kids, right? We went off because, we were in a foreign land. We want to make sure we were right. So when people are traveling, especially executives, right? What are the situations and the measures being taken to help protect employees? Workplace violence is another one, sadly becoming more and more of an issue, right? That by law, any act taken by an employee that undermines the purpose for which an enterprise exists is called workplace violence. There is a basically tort theory that says if an employee, right, this is where I go back to the drug testing, no drug testing, no drug. If an employee commits an act of violence against another employee or customer, right, and the company should reasonably have known that, right, that company can be liable, i.e., Well, the person got high and went on a rage and we didn't drug test them, that could be a problem, right? So workplace violence, there should be zero tolerance provision. Someone gets in a fight, hits somebody, just done, right? That's it, it's out. What are the preventive approaches to stop that? I.e., when we see changes in behavior in someone who's always gregarious and outgoing, doing a good job, quiet, reserved, missing work, got to figure out, all right, something's happening there. This is not normal. Let's figure out before, something worse happens. Crisis management approaches and then recovery approaches as well. Knowledge check. Which of these is best suited to minimize violence in the workplace? Is it terminate employees only at the end of the week? Avoid discipline employees in public? Communicate pay increases in private? Or require angry workers to leave the premise? This is interesting. I would say there's two. Yeah, so Candace, I would agree with you. So the answer is B, right? Avoid disciplining employees in public. No one likes that. But I also think, frankly, they all have some application, right? But you don't want to terminate employees just at the end of the week. If someone hits someone on Monday, why wait till Friday, right? That doesn't work. But I do think requiring angry workers to leave the premise, you need to get out of here and calm down, right, is valid as well. So I would go with B or D, but the correct answer for this case, this would be an example of, we talked about in the exams, right? One answer is best, one second best. Best here would be avoid discipline in public. You get second best credit for requiring angry workers to leave the premise. Theft and fraud, right? Companies can be criminally responsible for fraud perpetrated by employees. Okay, so if they're stealing customer information, right, they're stealing from the company, each other, the company can be held criminal liable for it. So what are those fraud and theft measures, right? So it was always limiting who has access to cash. It's putting, dollar values based on job title, right? A VP is going to have a higher ability to write money than a director. Does that mean VPs are more honest? No, but there are probably fewer of them and it's easier to control. Right. One of the big problems we had when we were Time Warner on the L&D side was we gave everyone got travel cards for expenses, right? And a lot of facilities, we lost about half of them got fired because they just went crazy with it, thought it was their own personal, credit card to go out and do whatever they wanted with. And that became an issue, right? Internal financial controls then, right? One of the things talked about, help employees be honest, is don't put temptation where it can be, it can be too overwhelming, right? So what are those good, carefully developed systems of internal financial controls? And a good system of financial controls involves having that clearly defined procedures for handling monies and the accounting for it, and then spending limits and other financial procedures that I just mentioned on the other slide as well. And the anti-fraud and FSGO companies should implement effective anti-fraud program. We really just covered this, right? So what are parts of anti-fraud programs? Good reporting mechanisms for fraud, right? Oversight by upper management, prudence in hiring candidates, i.e. going back to credit reporting, right? Background checks, right? Even drug testing, communication about ethics and code of conduct, compliance with procedures and regular review for necessary modifications, enforcement of expectations and prevention through the development of internal controls. And I think our last knowledge check for tonight, investigations of fraud that involves senior management should be conducted by the company's legal counsel, outside investigators, a panel of supervisors, or a committee of employees who have no leadership responsibilities. That's right. Let's give the front line the ability to do that. Yeah, that's pretty easy 1B, right? If you've got, senior leaders, you don't want, junior employees making that. It's not a jury of peers. Don't want the company's legal counsel. There could be a conflict of interest there. It is bringing in outside investigators. And normally that's the board of directors' job to bring those people in. And folks, that's it. We are done with Unit 5. Questions about, that was all pretty straightforward stuff tonight, but questions about anything that we've covered, right, between 16, 17, 18 weeks ago and tonight. Yeah, yay, Marilyn, right? This time, it's like, when I start with a new group, I got another one starting Monday. Yeah, we did it, Taylor. You absolutely did, and you guys got this. It's like, oh, this is great. And get to know everyone. You love them. You look forward to meeting. And then all of a sudden, it's like gone, right? It's just like, it's just over. And so, time goes by quick. It's, it is crazy. So Wednesday night, if I can get logged on, we'll just do a quick review, right? Just kind of use it as Q&A, ask questions, right? We'll just really talk through it versus just me trying to run through 5. I could, in fact, that what I'll probably do if I can find it is go through some of the questions that I've seen come up on the recent exams. And we can go from there, but we'll talk Wednesday. If by any stretch I have an issue getting logged on Wednesday night, I'll send people a note and I'll make it up on like Thursday when I get home, or Friday, or one day next week. But you always are able to reach out to me anytime between now and your exam. So the final 2 exams, you have to have those completed before you go take your certification. So if you're going to take your certification on Saturday, you got to get them done and passed before then. If you're going to take your certification 6 months, you got 6 months to go ahead and get those done. You just have to have those all done at an 80% level before you take your certification. And realize a couple of times you can only take it once every 24 hours. So just be mindful of that if any of you are going into exam time this weekend or next week or coming. Yes, all of them, right? They all have to be at 80%. If you have questions about those, anything on there, let me know. Be glad to work through. I will only be traveling this week. I'm back in next week and back in the comfort of my own home. And I really realized how much, yes, for both, Alma, how hard work travel was. Get up early, park, get on a bus, get to the airport, go through that mess, get a rental car. So looking forward to the comfort of my home. Questions, anything else? Well, it has absolutely been a pleasure and an honor to spend this time with you. Thank you for your trust. Thank you for your time putting in this. I hope I added some value, not only in terms of your certification, but just your general HR knowledge. And your companies are really, yeah, I will, Taylor. I got a Mexican place right down the street. I'm going to go get some good burritos, I think. But your company should be lucky to have you. This is a big dedication in time, and it's not easy, right? And it's been an absolute pleasure. You've been dedicated, diligent, good questions. I know you will do great. Please remember you've got this. And I'm here. I'm here all the way up through your exam. So if you're going to start taking it in August and you want to talk about some stuff, shoot me an email, say, hey, I'm such and such from your Group 1 to 2022 class. I'd love to talk to you about that. I will put time in the calendar and definitely make that happen, right? I am here for you through that. And or if you just need a pep talk, let me know. And when you go take your exam and you crush it, I'd love it if you just send me a note as well to that effect and say, hey, just want you to know, took my exam, aced it, got it. And then any information you know on the exam. Oh, thank you, Catherine and Maria. I work really hard at it, and I appreciate that. let me know what's on the exam, right? If you can remember some of the questions and content, it would really help kind of pay it forward for the groups that are coming in after you as well. So, all right, everyone, I will leave you with that. I will see you here Wednesday. Like I said, if for some reason I go through the same issues, my other teams that I will send a note. I will make that time up one night next week, or we can get together individually. So I plan on being here, but it was just by happenstance. I caught Jennifer and she was able to, probably as they were asking us for XYZ code, we don't have access to that mailbox. Right. I think they put a security measure. Oh, well, you're using a computer I haven't used before, or you're in California, you're normally in South Carolina. Is it you? But that code doesn't come to us. It goes to the admin mailboxes. I think that's what's going on. But that said, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Monday. And for those of you that want to come on Wednesday, it's great. It is not required, does not count for or against attendance, but we can just talk through whatever you have. And if I don't have the answer to something, I'll get it to you when I get home. All right. All right, everyone. You got a minute to spare. Have a great rest of your evening. Those on the East Coast, hope you have a good evening. West Coasters, I'm right there with you. Going to go out and grab some dinner. We'll talk to everyone soon. Take care, everybody.